Good afternoon. I'm chuckling a little bit because wearing a Hawaiian shirt today, celebrating my love for Hawaii and paying tribute to the fast approaching summer. It's a beautiful spring day. I was out and about, couldn't help but notice the blossoms. Trees are in bloom. Nature is smiling. Saw some baby ducks today on the bike trail, Mom and her baby ducks. That was really sweet. Little black ducks. Yeah. A definite reminder that spring has probably sprung. Today I'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping, which is what I call cleaning up some of my boo-boos that I noticed I made. I wanted to talk first about my high regards for the Vietnamese Zen monk, Thich Nhat Hanh. I hope that's closer than my attempt of a few days ago. Great man that loved his work. Wish there were more like him. And something else that, if you can't laugh at yourself, if you can't get a chuckle out of your errors, I still can't seem to separate astronomy and astrology. But for the pundits of each, they must be what they do consider a huge difference. So I'll try to do better when I mean astrology. I'll try to say astrology. And likewise, when I mean to say astronomy or astronomers, I'll say astronomy and astronomers. With any luck. But don't hold your breath, I don't. And part of my confusion, my slips, is that one of my guides, a being that was, I see in the guise of Roger Bacon, 13th century Franciscan monk, the big silent giant. And he practiced both. He was an astrologer. He was a wizard. I love that about him. But he was also one of the first to apply empiricism, logic, to the scientific approach. And it's lauded by scholars for his participation in the changing of the guard. But nevertheless, in his day and time, astrology and astronomy were both considered sciences. Yesterday I talked about facts didn't really have much of a draw, not much of appeal to me. And earlier, if you go back and look, I like an article, I like a episode I did, fact, fiction, and opinion. And maybe this is why I'm cavalier that when it suits my purposes, let's not pay too much attention to facts. I'm not a stickler for facts, which doesn't, of course, translate that I don't appreciate honesty. But my point is that facts can become non-facts with the advance in our understanding, scientific or otherwise. So I see a little bit of flexibility. In a reliance, a total reliance in facts, and spending too much time accumulating them. Again, this is part of my housekeeping. I guess what I mean is about facts. Never let facts curb your enthusiasm. I certainly don't. So, as far as I know, maybe you've caught others, but I've addressed my latest blunders and hopefully put them to rest where they belong. Always willing to overlook missteps and give everyone another chance. What I really wanted to talk about today, what I really put my Hawaiian shirt on for today, is to talk about, to share about where my spiritual wandering, where my search and my questioning, what kind of individuals, whose paths did I cross? And why did it take to mid-60s to find someone I could call my teacher? I've mentioned maybe too many times, but I've been thinking, bear with me if you will. Paramahansa Yogananda. He wrote the autobiography of a yogi, which I found on my mom's quite amazing bookshelf. She was always into spiritual kind of pursuits or questions. So I was knocked out by this book. It just, those of you that aren't familiar with Paramahansa, it was the first, really credited as the first yogi to go and spend the major part of his life in the U.S. His group, you can find information if you're interested in the Self-Realization Fellowship, SRF. They've got a beautiful, I've never been to the one in, I believe, New York, but I've certainly been to the one in the hills above Malibu. Beautiful, peaceful, tranquil. He sought to create some sense of familiarity between a Western audience and himself. And he was an ardent admirer of Jesus the Christ. Jesus the Buddha, who knows? Don't want to step on toes, but Jesus the Christ. And he used Jesus' words and showed the commonalities between his Hindu faith based on bhakti. Bhakti is devotion to his guru, to his predecessors. He had a driving and abiding love for his teacher, for his master, for his guru. But to his credit, he really didn't let a cult accumulate around him. One of the problems that come in with all these guys is that who's next? Who's going to take the mantle? And it can lead to some. So he was clear. There'll be no next, there'll be no replacement for him. But he did see the need. James Lin, I believe is his name. The first two names of my brother's name, coincidentally. To lead the organization that he established, but without a direct lineage continuation from the lineage that he so proudly represented. Why he made those choices that he did, I don't know. Maybe to keep that unsightly occurrence that happens after, that he might be well aware of, that happens after the guru, after the teacher leaves the physical body, that there might be bickering and division amongst those that would like to take his place. So this is Paramahamsa Yogananda. Again, he died when I was 4. He died in 1952. So, needless to say, I never met him in the flesh. So, I accepted him as my first teacher. Not understanding that maybe it would be a lot better if your teacher was breathing. I don't know. I'm still not sure. But I just felt that affinity and it didn't matter. Found the magic in his words. On that same bookshelf, my mom was a big fan of the Theosophists, Annie Besant, Russian, I believe. The Theosophists were really interesting. They were Western mystical science. So the West did have this tradition. It's not solely India and the Far East that had a mystical, spiritual background. The Russians, yeah, and other European followers. And I remember reading her work, and it's really fascinating because they talk about really the kind of manifestations of spiritual achievement, occupying more than one body simultaneously, instant transportation, and a lot of the magic of mysticism. Although extraordinary accomplishments by spiritual people, which I'm in no position to deny. I've never seen it, never experienced it, but that doesn't mean it's not so. But it just didn't hold sway on me. I just didn't get it. It wasn't necessary. I didn't need it. I didn't need any magic. Just the simple truth of their words and their life were all the magic I ever needed. But I did take note, and it was reassuring or comforting that it was part of the, maybe just a fringe, maybe not much more than a fringe, but there is a Western esoteric sources of wisdom and inquiry that goes back a long ways. Before medieval times. So there was my exposure, and I read a lot of the books and found some enjoyment and a little bit of guidance. But the first Westerner of any note that made an impact was a few years later when I read a book by Christmas Humphreys. I love that name. He's recognized today, the late 1800s, I want to say. Maybe he was alive in the 1900s. I'm not sure. I could look it up for you by next time. But he wrote a book called Walk On, a really short book. And it was practical, solid advice. Walk on. Keep walking. Be resolute. Dedicate yourself to that spiritual path. So those of you might look up Christmas Humphreys and the book Walk On. I'd like to find it again for my library. And my library is really thinned down, and I keep most of my books on my iPad, e-books. I do my reading on e-books. Just saves me the space that books take. Although I can look over there and see, must be 200 still, but it represents probably less than 1% of the library I had accumulated at one point. I followed in my mom's footsteps in that way. She was always a book lover. We were taught to respect books. I remember going to university when you highlight the book, and what a battle I had with marking a book, because I would have been punished from my mom, physically punished for marking a book. But I did learn that judicious use of a yellow marking pen could be helpful in reviewing for examinations. When I was at university, I studied Eastern philosophy. I was minoring in Eastern philosophy, and I remember taking some classes first on the Vedas and then the more advanced. The oldest work was the Vedas, and the newer work was the Upanishads. And I approached it from academic viewpoint. I took classes, but I did get exposed to some great professors, Indian professors. Those of you that haven't had a chance to speak to Indians much, I think they're the greatest practitioners of English language. God, it's just beautiful the way they use the language. Beautiful. And I'd be kind of mesmerized. But I remember the first exam and say, "Whoa." Yeah, the first exam was a wake-up call. Oh, you gotta study this stuff. And at the same time, I got involved with a very interesting group. I don't remember how exactly, from a friend to a friend. But they practiced meditation. They would sit around and hit a little bell, have a candlelight, chant Om, chant Om. And it was nice. Small group, and a few of us would, a few close friends, practice it at home as well as going to a weekly meeting. But we got a little bit different. And this is Western people, by the way. Okay, there wasn't any Eastern person leading this group. And it was a local group, a Hawaii group, and I don't know if they were affiliated to other groups. It was a hardcore group of people that meditated. But they also believed in flying saucers, extraterrestrials who visit the earth. And I remember, seems to me, they like graveyards. I don't know why the extraterrestrials like graveyards, but we go out to the more remote graveyards, large remote graveyards, and look for flying saucers. Well, any falling star, any object that was lighting and moving in the sky was immediately recognized or proclaimed a spaceship. And Vasu, I can remember Vasu, I don't know if that's I kind of looked at a Sanskrit word, but what I was told is, send them love, Vasu, send them love. And we would meditate in the graveyard in the middle of the night, looking for aliens. Sorry, deep breath. But I didn't get too involved. I certainly didn't join anything or sign any papers or enlist. But I find it useful and entertaining, and definitely a part of my practice. My meditation practice had been going on for years, and that was the one consistency. It was my personal meditation practice. I just knew the benefits of meditation, and I kept this practice alive. Even in the darkest times of my life, I had a companion of meditation. And the next thing that comes to mind is a classmate of mine. And I'm going to avoid names. I don't think it's necessary to. I named Paramahamsa because the self-realization fellowship is a legitimate, respectable group. But in my search, I'm going to touch on some groups that were maybe, that this wasn't necessarily so. Not classmate. We were contemporaries. We graduated from high school at the same time. Different high schools in Hawaii, but needless to say, he was my age. Son of a doctor. son of a physician. And he started becoming a serious meditator, and he had amazing charisma. Was physically a good-looking young man, and people kind of flocked to him. I remember his parents had a place out on the North Shore, Quonset huts, right on the beach, and he spent a lot of time there. Quite good surfer. But I remember he just had a beat-up old piece of board. His board was just tossed in the yard. Looked like garbage. And he would go out on big days on the North Shore, and he could surf quite well. But he didn't care about everybody else was into their equipment, because I was a surfer at that time too. New boards, new ideas, consumerism. But he didn't really care much. He surfed when he surfed, and he tossed the board in the yard until he needed it the next time. And I just remember appreciating his lack of surfing because it's the thing to do. He just enjoyed the sport, and he was very good, quite accomplished. I have no doubt that if he would have applied himself and been so motivated, that he would have been he could have been a professional surfer. So his first group, he attracted two things: money and women. Pretty heady stuff for a young guy in his 20s, huh? He had a group primarily of women on Maui, and they just worshipped him. And that's probably where he got the first taste of being worshipped. Worshipped to the point of being a deity. And I don't really know what happened with this group on Maui, but it eventually broke away. And he joined the Hare Krishnas. And he became a Hare Krishna. And devoted himself to promoting this group, which, from where I sat, wasn't a group that I wanted to be involved with. Since some ulterior motives, not sure what, but so he was with them quite some time, Australia, New Zealand, from what I understand. And then he already went through a transition of adopting spiritual names. Now, whether or not these names were given to him as is the tradition, or he just assumed them, it's not for me to say. But he used a variety of titles. And from the translation, it seemed like each time he got a new name, it meant that he was higher and holier. And his group still exists to this day. Controversial. He's gotten involved in politics. Quite some interesting things to watch. He set up some very successful health food stores. I know at one point, probably still, he made some juices. So he has money. He's living in a very exclusive area, in a rich area near the beach, and it's impossible to contact him. He's protected by his devotees. And I found that even trying to do research, because he's controversial, trying to do research about him using the internet on my machine, I noticed that I got a virus. And I'm pretty convinced that his paranoia, that his money, that his people are quite capable of infecting with the virus anyone that wants to look too closely. And he's had some vocal critics, but I've noticed that sooner or later they shut up and move on to something else. So this commonality here was that I knew him before, had no contact with him all those years from the time he first started attracting the pretty woman and going to Maui. No contact. But it was interesting because he's a contemporary. So I just would always want to see what he was up to. And I still know him by his given name. And that was okay. I made a trip to California to visit friends, and friends were first into SRF, Self-Realization Fellowship, and then they had found Muktananda. Baba had come and set up shop in Santa Monica near them. And when I went to visit from Hawaii, they encouraged me. It was lifelong, like brothers, okay? Kids that I grew up with. And they encouraged me to see Muktananda. Well, by the time I got to his ashram in Santa Monica, he had passed away a week previously. But I got Shaktipada, they call it, 3-day intensive. Costs money. Everything costs money. Okay. And I've mentioned that I did enjoy some concepts, the structure. First of all, first time I really meditated with thousands of people. And one thing I appreciated was the energies, the male, the yin and the yang, the male and the female were in separate parts of the rooms. And so their chant would be complementary. And they wouldn't necessarily always chant at the same time. There would be the woman's part and a man's part. And the synthesis and the whole idea of yin and yang was really beautiful to me. And the female energy, for whatever reason, seemed to dominate. Seemed to be stronger. Maybe women are just more pure. Who might have said it? But that was so. And then there was a brother and a sister who had been followers. Came from India with Muktananda, with Baba as he was known affectionately. And both were, again, he didn't designate, but they both assumed. And then there was a schism between the brother and sister. The brother was pretty much run off, and I understand that he is doing his own group now. But the female kept this together. And again, this group has not been without controversy. But, as usual, part of the normal MO, modus operandi, for me was to Look, watch. Keep a distance. Don't join. I didn't sign up. Again. But I have dearest friends, the friends from those days, who are still part of this group. And I love them dearly. And I respect their consistency, their dedication, their bhakti yoga, their reverence for devotion for this man, and for the woman who followed. But no duality. And the only consistency for me was the continuation of my own practice. But shortly thereafter, in Hawaii, this little lady, and I'll use her name, okay, why not? Master, the name she used at the time, I don't know, she goes through evolution. Master Ching Hai. And she came to Hawaii. And in Vietnamese town, the old traditional part of downtown that had been Chinatown in the 70s morphed into Vietnamese town and only grew with the US involvement in Vietnam, and then when the war was over in the 70s, a huge influx of people came into US Hawaii who hadn't chose the winning team. Came over as boat people. And Shanghai was a Vietnamese, raised in the Roman Catholic tradition, I understand, but she had some spiritual inquiry. She spent time in India. She spent time right here in Taiwan, I've been led to understand, with another Vietnamese monk, and she was granted some power. She was granted, this is their story, okay? She's got television channels. At some point, she'd been married to a German for a couple of years. At some point, married and divorced to a German. But at some point, she became interested in fashion, and she got this golden hair. It's a tiny little lady. But started a fashion line. She had TV channels. She had TV broadcasts. She had a chain of vegetarian for sure, but probably vegan restaurants. I remember seeing one on Pang 10, 15 years ago. I don't know if it's still there. But this was subsequent to my first going to see, I went to see anybody that put a poster up about spiritual teaching, I was there. I had occasion to see many people who I won't go into, but everybody would sooner or later come to Hawaii because it's a beautiful place. And who wouldn't want to visit there? But it's a spiritual place as well. So everybody came through there, and everybody would present a program that was basically free or accepted donations. So I went to hers in downtown, Vietnamese town, and I was the only white face there, and that's not an unusual situation for me, for whatever my karmic path has been. I've been the only white guy in the room most of my life. So because I'm white, male, it's not for me to deny that I was privileged. I enjoyed some privilege. Just because how I looked on the outside. And I'd like to think that maybe some of what's inside would come out, and that my welcome was not only racially and gender motivated, that maybe some of my spiritual being came to shine through. Another idle speculation, I'm sure. But they put me on the front row. A couple thousand people, they're a big group, put me on the front row. And being on the front row, being white, she couldn't help but noticing me. And after her talk was over, one of her minions came up to me and said, the master is inviting you for dinner in a nearby restaurant. Would you do us the honor of attending? Well, why not? And she was a cute little thing. I mean, tiny, cute little thing. And genuine. Her genuineness didn't overwhelm me, but I should stay out of my judgmental proclivities. Anyway, personal encounter. And tried to recruit me, and I was on their mailing list for quite a number of years, but I tend to move a lot, so eventually. But again, not for one moment interested in joining. Certainly didn't see her as my teacher. So you can go Google her today and make up your own mind. But the commonality between what I would call charlatans, and the title of this episode is more to catch your eye than really meant to be a harsh criticism. But a red flag for me would be interest of money, display of wealth, nice cars, nice clothes, good digs. Red flag for me. Charging, expecting donations. I forgot to mention that I ran into Scientology somewhere in the mix of this, and hopefully we're all aware of what that organization truly is. So I did have my brushes with the charlatans, but I was aware enough that I watched what they did instead of listening to what they were selling. And in several cases, it was definitely a sales pitch. Some more sophisticated than others. Some more charismatically driven. But the commonality, another commonality besides the recruitment, which has monetary purposes primarily, and the worship of the followers as divine living gods or living Buddhas. No, I respect and I learned the tradition coming out of India, where this was pretty much the way things were done. Bhakti yoga. It's one of the three ways of spiritual inquiry, and based on devotion. But I also knew at the same time that the definition of a cult is the worship of the leader as a god. But it doesn't mean that they're without value or they're just scam artists. Because their teachings, their dharma is based on some validity. They got it from somewhere. And they all offer something to learn on many levels. So, I'm not dismissing them out of hand. I'm just saying, pay attention to your red flag. My personal experience with determining or saying or believing who's enlightened or who's not enlightened is something that I don't know and I can't tell. Maybe others know. I know on an individual level that being knows, because what happens is without doubt, beyond doubt. But from the outside looking in, who's to say? Certainly not me, but I separate the importance of whether or not they're enlightened for the value of their teaching. And I strongly suggest, that don't be sold a bill of goods. Don't buy in too quickly. Watch and wait. Look at actions, not words. Ignore the followers. For the most part, at least when they're proclaiming something about their leader, exclusivity, anything that leads to those things. He's the best, he's the only one, blah, 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 blah. Beware. But don't dismiss them out of hand. They all have something to offer if you watch and listen well.